So this is, I've just started a postdoc project on this, so I'm not going to be showing you anything interesting. No, so basically the whole idea is to set up a national working group on alien grasses in South Africa. So just to introduce you to the idea of alien grasses in a global context. I found this very cool picture. This paper in 1992 by Carlo D'Antonio and Peter Vertusek, very highly cited, and basically they were the first to highlight the impact that alien grasses have had on changing fire regimes in many places around the world. So, especially African grasses have had a huge impact in places like Hawaii and South America, etc., on increasing the frequency of fires and the intensity of fires in these areas. Another really well-known international example is bromus in the States. So this all over here is bromus, and it's invaded sagebrush steppe all across the Midwest of the US, and it's really a massive problem over there. So what's the situation in South Africa? And through my literature review and looking around, it seems like we're not really that certain. So that's why we have this very confused little baby over here. So in 2004, Sue Moulton and a few other people, not just Sue Moulton, sorry, published this paper, basically as a review of alien grasses in South Africa. And she found that there were 113 naturalized alien grass species in South Africa. And this really is the last update to our knowledge of what we have in the country. There are 7 CARA Category 1 grass species in the country, and just to introduce you to a few of the more well-known ones. So we heard yesterday about Arundo donax, and there has been a bit of work by Working for Water on this species, but it's really a very aggressive invader of our riparian systems and around the world. Another fairly well-known one is Pennisetum cetaceum, fountain grass, and at the moment this seems to be largely restricted to roadsides in more arid areas of the country, but with the potential to become a big problem in the country. But in general, I think we know very little about the impact of alien grasses in South Africa. So this is just 2 papers, and really when I was trying to go through the literature, obviously this is not everything, but there aren't that many papers on the impacts of alien grasses in South Africa. So we know that Pennisetum cetaceum could be a problem. We also know that some European grasses are a problem in the fynbos. I couldn't actually find anything about Arundo donax, but I mean there may be papers about that. And Working for Water has done very limited work on grasses in general, apart from Arundo donax. So, what does the future hold? Just before I go on to that, this might also be that perhaps alien grasses aren't really a problem in South Africa, but I think we don't really know enough about them to actually say that they're not a problem, or that perhaps we just haven't paid enough attention to them. And definitely in the future, I think we need to be looking at grasses as a potential threat. So there's a lot of movement to introduce grass species for biofuels, so miscanthus, etc. We still have a lot of pasture grasses being imported, and hay, etc. you have unintentional introductions. Horticultural species, so Pampas grass is still grown and sold in nurseries around the country. And there are many new species being introduced for horticultural purposes. And then I'm going to talk a little bit later about bamboos and the possible emerging threat of bamboos in South Africa. So the whole idea of my postdoc is to establish a national working group, as has been done for cactaceae, and it's a really cool looking cactus, yeah. And if you, I think this afternoon, Haley Kaplan will be talking about the cactaceae working group. But the whole idea of a national working group is to essentially develop a national strategy for a particular group of plants. So when I asked John, well, what is a national working group, I really wasn't sure what the whole aim of it is, but John suggested I look at Brian van Vulken's paper on acacias, and that's what I'm going to introduce you to now, just to give you an idea of the sort of things that a national working group should or could do. So this was a paper that was part of the special issue on acacias in 2011 in Diversity and Distributions. And the acacias are a really nice group to work with in South Africa because the taxonomy is really well understood, we understand the impacts really well, and they outlined this potential national strategy for this group. So they looked at the range and abundance of these 16 invasive and naturalized acacia species in the country. They looked at their uses, and they then used this to categorize these species. So you can see here on the x-axis you have the value of the benefits of the species, and they used area invaded as a measure of the impact of the species. And you can then group the species into these different categories. They then outlined a number of management tactics for the different categories of species, so prevent introduction, eradication, containment, etc. I'm not going to read it all out to you. And associated with management tactics, they suggested a whole bunch of management practices. So risk assessment, EDRR, mechanical and chemical control, etc. And then a number of goals that you might want to achieve for a particular species. So you want a measurable reduction of impacts to a sustainable and tolerable level, retention of benefits where possible, prevention of spread to unoccupied areas, sorry there's a bit of a glitch there, etc. And what they then did was link all of these together. So you have your categories of species, link these to the management tactics and practices to achieve particular goals. And they had a big table in the paper, but I'm not going to try and show you that because it's just too many words and won't fit on the slide. But just to give you an example of, so this over here, widespread invaders with significant benefits, that's this first category, this category over here, so where they have high benefits and high area invaded. And they suggested the goals for these species should be a measurable reduction of impacts to a sustainable and tolerable level, retention of benefits where possible. The tactics you might apply are containment and impact reduction, and perhaps value addition. And the way you might do that is to employ these management practices. So it's all very nice and organized, and yeah, I think it's very nice. But when we come to grasses, if we look at the data that they used for developing a national strategy for acacias, it's a lot more complicated for grasses, I think. So the species present in South Africa we still don't really know what is out there, or at least I don't think we have a complete or nearly complete checklist of what is out there. And I think this is largely because identification of grasses is so difficult. And when people see a grass, they're like, okay, that's a grass, and they run away from it. So I'm going to suggest some ways we might get around that. And as a result, the distributions of many of these species are uncertain. As I've said, impacts are poorly researched. Benefits are likely for some of these species, but I think also poorly quantified. So, for example, for biofuels, etc., it's really a new market that is opening up, and I think we're only really scratching the surface of the potential of these species. And management tactics and practices are likely to be quite particular to this group because of the unique morphology and ecology of this group of plants. So, my suggestions, and please correct me later if you think I'm wrong, for what we should be focusing on, especially these two. So, looking at what we actually have in the country and trying to get a better idea of their distribution so that we can actually prioritize management and prevention of spread of these species. So a few ideas of what I think a national working group could actually do. So for trying to produce an inventory of species in the country and getting an idea of their distributions. And Leslie, sorry, I've stolen quite a few of your figures for my for my talk. But we can use some databases that are already out there, so Sapia, Cibus, GBIF, iSpot, etc., to try and produce a provisional inventory of species and their distributions, and perhaps then use this to design field surveys to get a better idea of what species we actually have. And then using this list, we might try and draw up a key or perhaps a field guide of alien grasses in South Africa that we can actually then go and distribute to Working for Water and people out in the field, so that we can actually start getting the information that we need. Now, if we want to quantify impacts, I think at this stage it's quite difficult, and we're probably going to have to use very simple measures. So, area invaded, for that we might just use number of records, a number of quarter-degree grid cells that have occurrences, etc. But I also thought that perhaps maybe a better way might be to look at the rate of increase of area invaded. So we haven't, from these herbarium records and field sightings, we can actually look at the change in time, and that might be a way to prioritize species. But as I said, I'm open to suggestions. And then I think another really important thing that a national working group might work on is looking at possible invaders. So we know that alien grasses are a problem elsewhere in the world, and we can use databases like the Global Compendium of Weeds and GBIF, etc., to identify these species, and we can then conduct risk assessments and species distribution modeling to get an idea of possible future invaders in the country. And we can also look at species that industry is interested in introducing for biofuels and horticulture, etc., to try and prevent and mitigate future threats. And finally, I wanted to talk about the emerging issue of bamboos. And this is, I think, a very interesting but perhaps also scary issue. So already there are a number of bamboo plantations in the country, and these are actually often government sponsored. So this is the Eastern Cape Development Corporation, and they're actually using this as a social upliftment program to help communities generate income. And there are a number of NGOs that are also growing bamboos for carbon capture. You might have also seen they use bamboo for like bamboo flooring, furniture, etc., etc. So there's a lot of potential for bamboo, but some of the species that are being introduced are known to be invasive elsewhere. And I think there's been very little done to understand the potential impacts of these species. So basically now, and I think Anita, we can carry on into the discussion session. So I would like people's suggestions. I would also like people to volunteer to be part of the national working group. And basically, if you volunteer, we would like to try and set a date to have a workshop later in the year in Stellenbosch where we can actually flesh out a national strategy, or at least get the foundations for something like it. And just to sort of structure it, I developed this table, and I wanted your opinions on, what you thought about these different issues, whether they are actually important, or if you have other suggestions, and I would like to just get some names in here and have some dates for a workshop. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. We've got, I think let's do a couple of questions for Vernon, and then our CT is at 10:15. So we will have time between about 5 to 10 o'clock-ish until 4:15 for a sort of a more open discussion that relates to all the speakers in this morning's session. But I think first let's have a few questions for Vernon. Any comments? No, yeah? Yeah, no, it's behind you.
Thank you very much. An interesting study. What nurseries have you identified selling Pampas grass? Because I can guarantee you it is, ornamental grasses are very, very popular within landscape design, especially from a water-wise perspective. There's a big, it's one of your money spinners in a nursery, but I can't guarantee you. But, I can almost guarantee you that you will not find Pampas grass in a nursery. I will be interested to see your actual list of nurseries.
I mean, as I said, I've just started this, so no, I mean, I haven't served.
All right, so they're very, very strict on that. I can guarantee you.
Can I ask about the impacts of bamboos elsewhere in the world? You said there were problems. Can you tell us a bit more about what
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I haven't gone into this in much detail, but I mean, if you go look on Global Compendium of Weeds, you will find there are a number of bamboo species that are actually on there. And I mean, John, do you know? I think on Reunion they have bamboos, eh? Yeah. So I mean, there are a number of places in the world where they have been introduced and are problematic.
So, but are we talking about plants that are a massive problem elsewhere in the world that we have actively grown?
Well, that's the thing. I think we just don't know enough about it, and that's actually why we need to have a look at it.
Any more questions, Dave?
From a sort of my perspective, as a sort of hydrological perspective, bamboos typically grow in areas where they actually have a lot of water available.
Yeah.
And outside of those areas, they don't really grow well enough to be used as a crop.
Yeah.
So from a water perspective, they are an issue. And obviously, if you're growing them in areas, that's likely to be areas where they can get washed out, transported, or otherwise. And then lastly, from my knowledge, they're pretty awful to get rid of. They're like Arundo, but only bigger. So. You know, they're also not easy to eradicate.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, maybe bamboos or grown as crops won't be an issue, but I think we need to set out guidelines for best practice so that they don't become a problem.
If I can just add that the bamboo issue at the moment has been adopted by Janice Parker of Food and Trees for Africa. She's a very high-profile operator, and her NGOs are very high-profile. So it's a bit like the taking on our green brethren. If you are going to take on the green brethren, make sure that you are fully unionized, you have a full workshop, and your figures are absolutely correct. You walk into taking on Janice Park and her team in the Eastern Cape without the right figures, and you will be decimated.
Maybe you need to include them in your strategy workshop. I just want to check, was there a question at the back? Brian, you were next, and I
One of
think...
the most studied grasses was in South Africa is the selloana. My class started research in the early 70s, maybe in the late 60s. And they document a lot of the impacts that it has, research program and results, a lot of big program going pre-working for water, clearing the selloana table mountain. You guys pick up a lot of information out of the research done on that over the years.
Sorry, which species did you
The
say?
selloana, steeper, ground and selloana as well.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to take two more questions, and I think then we must have the open discussion. I think Leslie was next, and Rembrandt.
Just to say that there are many more grass species that have been proposed for listing on CARA and NEMBA because of conflicts of interest. They've just been shelved. So there are a number of difficult grasses, like Kikuyu, for example.
Yeah.
That's something that is very invasive, but what do we do with it? Nobody knows really how to deal with it. And vetiver is another one of those that's been used a lot for promoted for erosion control. There are broad species, there are lowland species, there's a whole lot, and so we've got conflicts of interest. That's going to be one of your big challenges.
Yeah.
And on Kikuyu, the nursery industry have called for its banning because they believe they've got to replace the Kikuyu on every single sports ground in the country. It's going to be boom time for them. So the nursery industry think it should go as quickly as possible.
Okay, last question for Vernon.
It's not a question, it's just a point for discussion. Because what I want to say is there's another tree called moringa, which I don't know if most of the colleagues who are here have heard about it. And I would like maybe colleagues from maybe Sanbi to start looking into the possibility of it being better, because most of the areas where you go, you hear about, even at rural areas, people are selling that tree, the seedlings, and even the powder, saying it's very good tree for medicine. And a colleague from forestry even came to us saying if they can allow people to plant it, and so there's a lot of things happening outside. And also, I just want to hear if there's, regarding the prickle pear, because I noticed a month ago when I was driving around Tanin, a former plantation is now newly planted by prickle pear, a couple of hectares. So I don't know what does the law say about that, just general.
Yeah, I think it sort of relates to this issue of potential conflicts where you've got a plant that's useful as well as quite invasive. And yeah, I don't know, John, do we have moringa on our list from the other day? We may. It's not one of them. Okay, all right. Great, thank you very much.